was fun. All right, so I missed one of the questions from one of the jurors, and we'll just do it this way. And I'll mark this Ainsa number 5. Actually, let's put this on so the witness isn't arguably influenced. Question: did the single footprint photographed match the defendant or the victim? If not, it shows someone else was in the area, correct? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the first one. Well, did the single footprint photographed match the victim, the defendant, or the victim? That's part 1. Or you could ask the question, was anything done to try to match the single footprint photographed with the footprint of the defendant or the victim? I think that's what they're trying to get at, but no objection to the defense? State? Okay, so that's okay. All right, let me have those other ones again. Thank you. For that, we can bring in the jurors. Rest. Okay.
Please rise.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, everyone. Please have a seat. The record will show the presence of all the jurors, the defendant, and counsel. The witness is on the witness stand. We're going to, the jurors have some questions for the witness.
Yes, sir.
And with all of these, it's if you know. If you don't know, let us know you don't know, and why not. All right, question, Detective Ainsa, has ATF, meaning alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, ran the serial numbers on the AK-47?
I don't have an answer to that.
No. All right, the follow-up question was, is yes, how are they registered? But since you don't know, I won't ask the follow-up question. Okay. Were Mr. Kelly's shoes and the deceased victim's shoes the same size?
No.
All right. Again, if you have personal knowledge or foundational knowledge, let us know. If not, let us know as well. In your testimony, you stated that the alcohol, tobacco, firearms canine found only one shell casing, and there were 9 total in the same area within a few feet. Why do you believe that is?
I have no answer to that. I do not know.
Next question. In the autopsy photos, there appears to be blood on the outer tan pants, but there is no blood on the physical pants shown to the jury. Why is that, if you know? And I think the juror's referring to, I assume you're referring to the physical pants being the actual physical exhibit that was brought into court. So I'll just repeat the question. In the autopsy photos, there appears to be blood on the outer tan pants, but there is no blood on the physical outer tan pants shown to the jury.
I have no answer for that either.
All right. You stated specifically in your testimony that the victim was shot with an AK-47, but you don't really know that since there is no bullet to test for ballistics. So how can you be certain it was an AK-47 or that the bullet was shot from an AK-47?
I don't have an exact answer to that either, but it's just the way, all the evidence, the AK that was found, the casings.
There were two expert ballistic witnesses throughout the case, and both of them tested their theories by photos and tests performed outside the scene. Why did none of those experts visit the actual site to perform those tests?
I have no answer to that. I don't know why they went out there.
Questions from another juror. What is the range for the AK-47?
I do not know that.
If you know, if the Border Patrol rode at the border wall, is the Border Patrol road at the border wall within the AK-47 range, in range from the Kelly home?
I do not know because I don't know the exact measurements.
The Forest Service road to the east, is the Forest Service road to the east within the AK-47 range from the Kelly home?
Again, I don't know how far the road from the Kelly residence is.
All right, and then, Counsel, the other question we just reviewed, I told you I'm marking as Ainsley number 5, but it's actually Ainsley number 6. Question, did the single foot, well, do you know, I'm going to phrase it a little bit differently, but do you know whether or not the single footprint photographed was matched against the footprints of the defendant or the victim?
I do not know that.
All right, and then the final thing was not a question, but it was something for the judge, and it said, for judge, when jury selection started, we were told that to not expect CSI level detective work. So whatever you were told in jury selection or opening statements, as I've said before, is not evidence. It's just, particularly in jury selection, the lawyers are just trying to prepare you for what the evidence may or may not be, but it's not evidence itself. So that's what that was all about. And of course, a defendant never has the burden of producing any evidence. The burden is always with the prosecution to prove the case by proof beyond a reasonable doubt. All right, that was those are all the questions from the jurors. I think I got them all. I'm going to hand those back to the clerk. Now, counsel for the state and defense, let's start with the state if you have any follow-up questions to any of the questions of the jurors.
Yes, Your Honor. Detective, let me ask you a question. Are you a ballistics expert?
No, I'm not.
And how many ballistics experts were hired in this case?
2.
As far as the AK-47 question, the injury sustained by the victim, was it from a high-powered weapon?
That is correct.
In your opinion, is the AK-47 a high-powered weapon?
That is very high power rifle.
As far as the question pertaining to the blood photo versus the physical pants, we're referring to the physical pants shown to the jury versus the photo on scene.
That's good.
Got those two in mind?
Yes.
The photo was taken how close in time to the event?
I don't remember the exact time, but it was pretty close.
Same day?
The same day, we were the same day.
And it's been how long since the pants have been in evidence?
Over a year.
As far as the ATF canine, I think the juror's question pertains to, if you remember that picture with blue and then yellow, a little blue circle with 1 casing and a yellow circle with 8 casings?
Yes, sir.
Which one did the canine find?
The one in blue.
And what happened after the canine found that one shell casing?
The agent retrieved his dog and left the scene.
And this is, what time of day is this?
It was early morning hours.
Early morning hours, some could be 7 o'clock in the morning, but how early is this?
It was probably soon after I arrived for the search warrant, after midnight.
And the last question is there any doubt who owns the AK-47 with the green strap with the flashlight taped on the barrel?
There's no doubt.
Who owns that gun?
Mr. Kelly himself.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Defense, follow-up questions?
So the blood that is not for the eye to see, and that was on the backpack, is that correct, Judge, from the question?
Pants.
Pants, thank you. That's kind of the same thing, wouldn't you agree, to the fanny pack photo, which shows the blood on the straps and not as visible when we pulled it out. Did you notice that?
No, I didn't notice that.
Okay. Did you look at the photo with the blood on the strap of the fanny pack?
Yes.
Okay. But when we showed it out here to everybody, it was harder to see it. Would you agree, or do you remember?
I didn't see it.
Okay. So somehow things absorb possibly, right? For both
Possibly.
pieces of evidence.
Sorry.
Okay,
Possibly.
no, you're fine. And I heard the experts say that an AK-47 was only an intermediate weapon, not a high-powered weapon. So why are you still drawing that conclusion?
To me, it is a high-powered rifle, ma'am.
Well, every rifle can be high-powered then, correct?
But this one is a high-powered rifle.
And you can have high-powered handguns too, can't you?
What's that?
And there is such a thing as a high-powered handgun too, isn't there?
Yes.
Okay, nothing further.
Thank you. Any follow-up question, any other follow-up questions or any other questions for this witness? Seeing none, all right, very well, sir. You can step down. And the state had, was there an exhibit that the state wanted to offer before we go any farther?
That's correct, Your Honor. Government Exhibit 117. This is a CD of photographs. Pursuant to court order, we called out some other photos.
All right.
And it's been provided, I think, last Wednesday or Thursday for defense to review. And
Your Honor, we will say that we didn't review, but we have no objections subject to those agreed-upon things were pulled out.
Very well, subject to confirmation that those agreed-upon items, the photographs were culled and taken out from the grouping 117 is admitted.
Your Honor, the state rests.
Very well, the state rests. Defense can call your first witness.
Can we go on the headset, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am. Hold on a second.
The defense calls Agent Marlon Layugan.
solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the matter before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
Thank you, sir. If you'd step over here to the witness stand, it's over here, step up.
Can you hear me all right? Yes. May I go ahead, Judge?
Let me just make sure his microphone is on.
Oh.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Would you tell us your name and would you spell your last name for the record, please?
My name is Supervisory Border Patrol Agent Marlon Layugan. Last name is spelled Layugan.
And could you tell the jury how you are employed?
I'm a Supervisory Border Patrol Agent. At the time, I'm currently assigned to Tucson Station. I transferred there in January. Prior to that, I was at the Nogales Border Patrol Station.
Could you give us the brief rundown of your training and experience?
Yes, I've been a Border Patrol agent for 11 years. All Border Patrol agents go through the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. It's located in Artesia, New Mexico. We learn immigration law, we learn customs law, arrest techniques. There's a lot of physical training. Vehicle pursuits, that sort of thing.
And after you completed that training, did you get stationed in the Nogales sector?
So I was stationed in Tucson Station, which is part of the same sector, and then I promoted in Nogales in 2021.
I think I meant to say Nogales Station.
No, so I was
apologize for
only in Nogales for 2.5 years.
that. Okay. And what was your role on January 30th of 2023?
Yes, I was assigned as the swing shift communication center supervisor. So that's an inside position. When we facilitate like a lot of the phone calls, we put out information on different traffic that's being worked in the field.
And did you at some point receive some communication involving George Allen Kelly?
Yes.
Tell us what happened.
So the shift starts at 2 o'clock, and about 2:40, one of the agents that was in the communications center with me was receiving calls from his friend, who was our ranch liaison. And the report was that the ranch liaison stated there were approximately 5 people who were trying to cross through his property, and that he was getting shot at and was going to return fire.
And so I just want to break down that communication chain for a second. You are in the office, correct?
Yes, ma'am. The communications center has like all of our camera feeds, and there's generally between 4 and 8 agents in there, 1 supervisor, and then 1 like a radio dispatcher.
And who?
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Finish up.
So the ranch liaison was talking directly between George Kelly and then relaying information to Josh Tersey, who was one of my agents. And Josh Tersey was trying to give me the information so that I could notify whoever I was going to notify or take whatever the actions were appropriate.
Okay. So you were in the communication center with Agent Tersey, right?
Yes.
And Agent Tersey is receiving some communication from Agent Morcell, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And Agent Tersey is passing that communication on to you.
Yes.
And your understanding from Agent Tersey is that Agent Morcell is receiving this information from George Kelly.
Yes.
Did you believe that George Kelly was speaking with Agent Morcell at the same time that Agent Morcell was speaking with Agent Tersey?
Yes, but can I clarify that a little bit?
Yes, please do.
So for some of the communication, it sounded as if it was happening all simultaneously in this long telephone game. and some of the communication wasn't. Because there was a period of time where Agent Morcell wasn't communicating with Mr. Kelly, but was only communicating with us and saying he couldn't get a hold of Mr. Kelly.
Okay, so you had more than one communication with Agent Morcell, right?
Yes, but again, to clarify, for the most part, Agent Tercey and Agent Morcell were talking, and then Agent Tercey was relaying the information to me.
And when Agent Tercey relays information to you, what do you do?
It really depends on the nature of the information. In this specific instance, with the report as it was, that there was potentially an active gunfight going on, I dispatched 2 available agents I had and notified the Pima County Sheriff's Office dispatch that was the report that we had received.
And so when you say you dispatched 2 agents, are you talking about Agent Heredia and Agent Dugan?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you communicate with them directly?
Via the radio, yes.
Do you remember what you told them?
I told them that we had received reports that Mr. Kelly, or from Mr. Kelly, that there was a group that was crossing his property and he might be engaged in a gunfight with them, and that Mr. Kelly was going to attempt to clear his property, so that when they arrived, just make sure that it's unmistakable who they are, just because different use of force events can get very confusing or foggy. So I wanted to make sure that they were readily identifiable, showed up with their lights on, and maybe chirp their sirens just to identify themselves, so that they would be safe in that situation. And then, basically they were going to make sure that they were going, as from what I understand, to help Mr. Kelly, because he was reporting that there might be people shooting at him.
And so did you communicate to them, there might be people shooting at this person, he might be shooting back, not sure what's going on, but go ahead and go check it out, more or less?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, was that at about 2:30 in the afternoon?
Sometime between 2:30 and 2:40, ma'am.
Okay, and they go out there. Did you also communicate with the sheriff's department?
Yes.
And what did you tell the sheriff's department?
Okay, so at the time I was talking to the sheriff's department, the situation that you were describing earlier with multiple people talking or communicating simultaneously, some of that was going on. I told them the same information that Mr. Kelly had reported people were shooting at him and he was going to shoot back. And then later, Agent Morcell relayed that now Mr. Kelly wasn't certain that people were shooting at him.
And when you say Agent Morcell relayed that, that's Agent Morcell talking to Mr. Kelly, who then, Agent Morcell then communicates with Agent Tercey, and Agent Tercey then passes that information on to you, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
Okay. Is that why you described it as sort of a game of telephone?
Yes.
Okay. What happened next?
So the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office sent, from my knowledge, it was going to be 2 deputies to the property. Then they met up with the agents that were there. There may have been more deputies, but I don't know for sure how many there were. And what they did was they swept the property to look for, well, they were looking for Mr. Kelly at first because they couldn't find him initially. And then they were going to sweep the property to look for what would have been a gunfight or some sort of active shooter event that was going on. But about, I want to say it was about 3:45 or so, I got word that they were going to be clearing the scene because they weren't able to locate a group or anything that happened.
Okay. And had Agent Tercey also attempted to search with cameras that general location?
Yes, ma'am. So we have, the Border Patrol has several, what do they call it, integrated fixed towers, and some of those have camera equipment. The tower that they were using was on Hines Ridge, and so it's a straight shot. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that it can see everything. It's from a fixed position. So they tried to search that area for any group that was, retreating southbound from the property. Just couldn't really see anything. He was able to see, like, where the agents parked their vehicles, but wasn't able to see or to detect like a group or anything like that.
Can you tell us if you know about the reliability of those cameras?
I mean, they're cameras, so they give us a video feed real time. They're reliable in the sense that the information you can get from them is, what's actually happening. You can't see everything though. Like it's not like a drone or something like that where you can change its position, or you can only really zoom in and zoom out.
Okay, and then if you're going to change it to a different location, does that take some time to do?
Oh, they're fixed, ma'am. You can't
can't
fix the
change their
camera,
location
no.
at all.
It's
Okay.
it's on a tower. It's affixed to the ground. You can't really.
Could you tell us a little bit, if you know, about the effectiveness of those cameras?
I've been an a fixed tower camera operator before. If it's a clean shot and you're looking at, a mountain range and people are silhouetting themselves on the ridgeline, you can see maybe, 13 miles on a clear day. When you're looking at different terrain, or if traffic is going down low in washes, you can't really see what's down low, especially because the way washes work, that's where a lot of vegetation grows as well. So it's generally easier for groups to conceal themselves in the low spots, or like out of view of the camera.
And when you say groups, what are you talking about?
Well, what I'm talking about is non-citizen migrants who are coming, or who are illegally entering the country, or narcotics traffickers who are illegally entering the country.
And so those are two different kinds of groups, right?
Yes, but may I clarify?
Yes, go ahead.
So these days, we generally don't. In the old days, we used to be able to differentiate because the drug that was being crossed most commonly was marijuana. Since there's so much more available marijuana within the United States now, and they're crossing more hard narcotics, which is smaller. So the way you'd be able to tell before was the packs they'd be carrying. They're generally be between 40 and 50 pounds. They're large and squared off. I can't tell just based on an image necessarily that what I'm looking at today is, I would say, like a regular migrant who's seeking a better life, or somebody who's crossing fentanyl. I can't tell on an image.
And we're going to come back to that in a minute too, but I heard you say that the washes are areas where groups conceal themselves. Do you know approximately, after these cameras get installed into an area, I imagine they're effective for a time, right? Do they lose their effectiveness over time? That's my question.
Yes, to some degree, because when groups, or when I guess scouts know that the camera can't see, or I'm sorry, when the scouts know that they can be detected in certain routes or certain pathways, well, of course, they'll change their traffic pattern to better suit them to be more successful.
And so is it common then for large groups who are trafficking something, whether it's people or drugs, to be able to avoid detection on the cameras?
Yes.
Okay. And before we come back to some of that, can you just go ahead and tell me what happens next? Everybody clears the property. We're done with call number 1. What happens next?
So it was approximately 2 hours later. I'm not exactly sure. I can't recall the exact time, but it's about 2 hours later. We had already considered this matter closed, but about 2 hours later, Agent Morcell contacted Agent Tercey, who told me that Mr. Kelly had called again and wanted only us to come. He said that he needed help, and from what Agent Morcell was saying, that Mr. Kelly says he may have struck something, but would not go into further details about what he was talking about.
And describe for me again, is this the same scenario that you had earlier in the day? Was Agent Tercey talking to Agent Morcell, who's talking to Mr. Kelly? Is that how this was working?
Yes, ma'am.
And then, so we'll do that backwards, I suppose. George Kelly calls Agent Morcell. Agent Morcell calls Agent Tercey. Agent Tercey talks to you directly, and then you contact the sheriff's department. Is that how that went down?
Yes, ma'am. And just to clarify, I contacted the sheriff's department because the two agents, Agent Heredia and Agent Duggan, who I had previously dispatched, were no longer in that area. So I wanted just to reach out to Santa Cruz to see if they had anybody available that could respond.
And I believe you said that, what did you tell dispatch that Mr. Kelly had stated?
I don't recall my exact words. I told them that, I asked them if they had anybody that was available to respond back to Mr. Kelly's residence, and said that, I told them that just basically what happened was that he called again and said he may have struck something, but was being intentionally vague with the details.
So that's what you communicated to the sheriff's department, that Mr. Kelly said he may have struck something.
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
right? Okay. And that was after a number of different steps in this telephone game, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So you never talked to Mr. Kelly directly, right?
No.
Okay. And so then what happens next after the sheriff's department goes out there?
So it was probably about half an hour to 45 minutes later when I can't recall if I called them or if they called me. You know what? I take it back. I did call them because I wanted to follow up. And they had notified me that it looks like it was going to be a homicide investigation.
And you also said that you had not sent agents out there. Heredia and Dugan, they were no longer in the area. Were there any agents in the area that you could have dispatched? Do you recall?
No, they were. We had a flex unit at the time, and that just means that they weren't necessarily going to be tied to a specific area, for the duration of their shift. So that's why they were the two that were called earlier, because it was early enough in the shift that I knew they would be. They would still be in range of comms, and I could get them over there. But at that point, later in the shift, once the SCSO had discovered the deceased subject, they weren't there. They were on the other side, sort of, I think near Patagonia. I'm sorry, not in Patagonia. What's the name of that lake? I already forgot. They were on the west side at that point.
Okay. And this area is on the east side of Nogales, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So the agents were in a different area and they were not readily available to be dispatched to this area. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
If they had been readily available, would you have sent them out there?
Yes.
Okay, because that's what you did earlier in the day, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about this area. What do you know about the area where you'd sent these agents to?
It's kind of a mix. There's ranch land. There's plenty of residents, like residential areas. A lot of it's dirt road off of Duquesne. It's probably about a mile or a mile and a half north of the international boundary fence. The Nogales station used to have more of an enforcement presence in the area. Doesn't really have as much now, that just different operational priorities. It is used by smugglers with bigger groups, and by bigger, I mean, it's all relative, right? So you might see 5 to 10 or 8 to 12 migrants in a group that cross there, and generally load up somewhere over there, and then go, like, load up into a vehicle and then head towards Highway 82.
So you've got people walking in this area and larger groups. When you say migrants, do you know that they're migrants?
Not until I interview them legally. I don't know that until I can, do an immigration inspection, but.
And that's because you can't visually distinguish anymore, right?
No, I can't.
Okay. What if you pick up somebody out there who's part of one of these groups? Well, tell me about the composition of migrant groups. Is there typically somebody who's guiding this group? How does that work?
I've seen a lot of different ways this has worked. Out there, most common is the groups will have either a foot guide present with them. Sometimes that's like a juvenile that walks that pathway over and over again. Sometimes not. Foot guides that I've encountered either have a radio or some means of communicating, sometimes a cell phone. A lot of the groups, if in different parts or in different parts of the journey, they'll like separate out, and so like making smaller groups, and then reforming later when they're closer to their load up. While they're separated out, they'll generally use WhatsApp or something like that, something where they can communicate and give each other coordinates of where to go and receive instructions from a foot guide that's present in the group or a scout that's on the mountain watching, or something like that.
And you talked about radios. If you see somebody who's a member of one of these groups carrying a radio, does that carry significance to you? What does that tell you?
I mean, the real answer is it tells me they're communicating with somebody. I couldn't say for sure that the radio makes that person a foot guide or a narcotics trafficker or something like that. I don't know that. But I do know that it means he's communicating with somebody, which means somebody's probably watching to direct their traffic.
And along those same lines, if you see somebody who's maybe up on a high hill or a high location with visibility, and that person's carrying a radio and binoculars, let's say, does that tell you anything about that person? If
that person's not, say, for example, like a U.S. citizen.
Right.
Let's put it this way. If the person has everything that they need to go deer hunting, but they're not deer hunting, then they generally might be scouting for us. Or not for us. They're scouting for their groups.
Okay. And so a scout, that's somebody who perches himself up in a high location where he can see, right?
Generally, yes, ma'am.
And the binoculars are obviously so that he can see better from wherever he's positioned.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the radio would be to communicate with whatever group it is on the ground that he's communicating with.
Yes.
Okay. And does that tell you, so somebody who is scouting, is a scout generally scouting for migrant groups, for drug trafficking groups, or both?
For both, ma'am, because it just depends on what they're crossing. The smuggling organizations will make money if they're scouting, or if they're trafficking narcotics. They make money from the narcotics. If they're trafficking migrants, then they make money per head. So either way, they could be like a scout could profit from that.
How organized is all of this, if you know?
I've never been in on any of their planning meetings, but I would say, based on my experience, they're pretty organized.
In other words, do you get groups of people who just take it upon themselves to cross the border on their own?
So through interviews with different detainees, yes. But the caveat to that is a lot of them are told to tell us that they just crossed on their own. They didn't pay anybody. There's nobody else in the group. So
Okay.
it's kind of hard to tell.
Okay. Tell us about RIP crews. What are those?
Okay, so RIP crews are, so there are groups organized also. They have different members, and they may or may not have been part of the smuggling organizations previously, and what they do is, in general, they'll attempt to rob a competing organization for the product, either being humans or narcotics. They'll do that at gunpoint, and then they're basically just poaching that load or stealing that load from them.
And so those people, you said they do that at gunpoint. If
Yes.
you're a member of a RIP crew, you're probably armed, right?
Yes.
Do you know what the typical gun is? Is there a weapon of choice for RIP crews that you're aware of?
I mean, I could speculate, because just from what I've seen, I encountered a RIP crew personally, but not related to Mr. Kelly's incident. But what we pulled off of them was a 9mm pistol, an AK-47, and an M4.
Okay.
Again, that was in the Green Valley area. That wasn't here.
Right. But just as a general example, rifles, pistols, these groups carry something of that nature, right?
Yes, ma'am. They'll carry some sort of a firearm.
And the purpose of that is to rob whoever's bringing over either drugs or people, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so the groups who are bringing over drugs and people, what do they do to deal with this possibility?
Well, they evade detection from us, which also probably means they're evading detection from the other RIP crews or from the other organizations. They may or may not arm themselves. I mean, we recover, firearms in the desert from time to time. But I would imagine that they could potentially be armed if they're traveling with the group.
Okay. Do you know anything about fanny packs?
Yes, they like a storage to carry around your waist.
And do you see fanny packs being carried fairly commonly?
I see fanny packs, and then there's a little, I don't know what you call it, like a satchel or something that people carry.
Is that in addition to carrying backpacks?
Okay, generally not. Usually I'll see one or the other. And it depends on where the group is. What I mean to say is, some parts of the Nogales AOR area of responsibility are more remote, and that's a longer walk. The migrants could be out there for maybe a week, and they'll carry a backpack full of food and whatever personal effects they brought. But generally, it looks like they're camping for a week. With something like a fanny pack or a satchel, they generally will just carry like a wallet, maybe a little bit of food, and it would be a shorter hike to wherever they're going to load up.
And so it's unusual to see both a fanny pack and a backpack carried by the same person at the same time?
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me either way, but in general, I don't see both.
If you were to see both, would that be significant in any way?
Not to me, ma'am.
Have you ever known folks, let's say you guys spot a group and they try to get away, have you ever observed them taking off backpacks?
Yes. Most of the time.
Did you say that again?
Most of the time, if a group, so we call it quail or bust up a group, when we're not really in position to make the apprehensions, we can go chase, and in their effort to evade us or escape, migrants will often just throw their belongings on the ground and continue running because the backpack is full of food. It's just weighing them down.
Okay. And so could one reason for having a fanny pack and a backpack be to keep the more valuable items in the fanny pack so that the less valuable items could be dropped?
I suppose
Objection,
so.
Your Honor, calls for speculation. The witness has already said it wouldn't mean anything to him and asked and answered.
Overruled.
Go ahead.
Ma'am, could you please repeat that?
Sure.
question?
Would one reason for carrying a fanny pack and a backpack potentially be because the backpack can be dumped if you need to run away, and then the fanny pack might be carrying the more valuable items?
Yes, I suppose.
I just want to talk a little bit more about this area. You said that there was people walk through on foot and then generally get picked up by vehicles. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am.
And what are some of the pickup locations in this area?
There's different locations along Duquesne. If you've driven Duquesne, you'll know that there's 5 cattle guards that go from the Little Red Schoolhouse all the way towards Italian Canyon. And so there's just different spots that we know that pickups occur different times of the day. And we've gotten several vehicle loads coming out of there in recent history.
So Duquesne Road is one of those spots that's known for that?
Yes, ma'am. They're not necessarily always going to Duquesne. They might pass it and load up on 82 as well.
Duquesne Road, is that a road that connects to a Forest Service road that goes down to the end of the wall?
Yes, ma'am.
You're familiar with that area where the wall ends?
Yes.
And so you've got that Ballard fencing on one hand, right?
That's the tall one. Yes, ma'am.
And then there's that Normandy barrier that goes out the other way, right?
Yes, the Normandy barrier is in place. It doesn't actually stop like foot traffic, but it's sort of there just for vehicle traffic.
It's designed to stop vehicles. Do you go and check that Normandy barrier ever for cuts?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us about that. What do you find when you do that?
So what you look for when you're inspecting the fence is to look for breaks in the fence, either from a torch or like an angle grinder or something like that. You look for vehicle sign, which would mean that there's some indicator on the ground that a vehicle has driven from south to north.
And Your Honor, I'm just going to object to relevance at this point. There's no indication that there are any vehicles crossing the border involved in this case. I'm not even sure why we're talking about this.
And Your Honor, the reason it's relevant is because I expect what the agent will testify to is that he observes those cuts, he observes sign that there is vehicle traffic, significant vehicle traffic in this area, and yet Border Patrol has never actually apprehended vehicles in that area. And it's relevant to show that there's criminal activity that's taking place in that area that's not necessarily detected or apprehended by Border Patrol.
Overruled, he can answer, if he knows.
So go ahead, tell us more about the cuts in the Normandy barrier.
So what we look for is physical cuts or indication that it's been cut and re-welded together, not by us, which means that there would be a smuggling organization or somebody on the south side. We would look for, the vehicle sign on the road. That's about it, really.
And all of that obviously tells you that this barrier's been cut by a torch. It's been opened up a large enough area to allow a vehicle to pass through, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then just tell us how many vehicles that you're aware of have been apprehended in this area.
Ma'am, do you mean ever or?
We're talking about January 30th, just kind of the time period leading up to January 30th. Are you seeing a lot of this sort of vehicle sign? Are vehicles being apprehended? Just tell us a little bit about that.
We see cuts in the fence. We don't always catch vehicles. And a lot of the vehicle traffic that we are chasing on the north side in that area, lately they've been using UTVs. And again, just like we talked about before, the narcotics that is being trafficked through it's the harder narcotics, so it doesn't really require like a big pickup truck or an SUV. You could do it in a smaller vehicle, like a UTV or dirt bikes or whatever. You don't necessarily have to cut the fence, but.
Okay. And so when you do see the fences cut, that indicates a larger vehicle's passed through, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Give me just one moment, Judge. Are there trained personnel in the Border Patrol who are trained to look for tracks?
Yes, ma'am. That, I would say that probably the majority of Border Patrol agents have had at least some training or experience in what we would call a cutting sign. I'm sorry, did you mean vehicle specifically?
No,
vehicle?
no, footprints, cutting
Footprint.
sign.
Okay, yes, ma'am. And sign isn't just footprints, it's, you can look for high sign, which means that you can see broken branches and twigs and whatnot. There's a lot to it, but generally foot sign, yes.
Okay. And does that include tracking people who might be wearing carpet shoes?
Yes, but that's much more difficult to do.
And then, so the carpet shoes are effective, in other words?
Yes, and just to, I mean, it really depends on the location. But sure, any measures they take to conceal their prints or to distort their footprints makes it more difficult for somebody who's looking at the dirt.
Alrighty. I don't have anything else, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. So let's start first with the area that you just discussed with defense counsel. That area in Keno Springs, there are a number of north-south washes in that area. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And those are the areas you're talking about that are the low spots. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And defense counsel asked you about the Forest Service roads on the east of Keno Springs, but there are some on the west that go through the Buena Vista Ranch as well, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And those connect with those north-south washes in some spots, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And when those roads connect with those north-south washes, the roads go east-west where they connect, correct?
I'm sorry, you lost me a little
Sure.
bit. Okay,
So we got the north-south-ish washes, right?
Yes,
And on the west side of Keno Springs, sort of in that Buena Vista area, Buena Vista Ranch, there are some roads that go to the border wall, correct?
yes,
And do those cross over those north-south washes?
yes, ma'am.
And when they hit the border wall, could you go along the border to the end of where the border wall ends? Could you walk that from the west side over on Buena Vista? Could you walk along the border road to the end of the border wall?
Do you mean me personally or as an agent? Or
No,
just a
I just
human?
mean as a human being. As a
Yes.
human being, is it possible you follow that north-south wash until you hit the roads that come from the Buena Vista Ranch that go then to the border road that goes along the border?
Yes, ma'am.
So those connect, correct?
Yes,
And those are roads y'all use, the ones that come through Buena Vista Ranch that connect with the road along the border wall?
yes, ma'am.
So there's not just a way from the Keno Springs area on the east side of Keno Springs to get to the border, correct?
Correct.
You can also get there from the west side.
Yes,
And if you were going south in those washes that go through Keno Springs, then you could connect with one of those roads from the west side that connects to the border wall.
yes, ma'am.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Okay.
There's not one single avenue that they're using.
And do you see some traffic on the Buena Vista side?
Yes. By the Buena Vista, we call it the Buena Vista Ranch or the Buena Vista Reservoir. For a long time, we had a mobile surveillance truck that it's like those camera towers, except it's just on a truck. It's a less power, not as accurate. But we had one there to try to detect a lot of the foot traffic that was going up the Actually, it's at the wash right adjacent to where the ranch is, just goes straight north there.
And if Mr. Kelly had reported some cuts to his fence on the west side of his property, that would be consistent with folks using that avenue on the west side of Keno Springs, correct?
So to clarify, are
Sure.
we talking about cuts like with vehicles?
He was just talking about, he reported some cuts to his fence on the west side of his property. That would be consistent with groups passing through there, correct?
I couldn't tell you for sure that the cause of what damaged a fence.
Sure.
But
Does
sure.
that happen when you
Yes,
see
ma'am,
groups
it's
of
happened.
migrants? They cut the fence
They can cut
sometimes.
the fence, or they can like lift, if depending on the property, they can lift the fence post out of the ground and just lay it down. There's plenty of things that they can pull the wire up so that it's just dangling.
You can get through the fence without cutting it too, correct?
Yes, ma'am. So a lot of times they'll just separate like up and down, just enough for a body or a backpack to go through or what have you.
Okay. Now, Ms. Larkin asked you some questions about some fanny packs. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
And whether you wear those in combination with backpacks?
Yes.
You'd agree that you'd just be speculating why people would wear two, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. I couldn't tell you for sure why somebody wears a backpack or a fanny pack. I know generally backpacks are full of food, sometimes narcotics.
If you don't find any narcotics in a backpack, you find food and clothing, is that generally a migrant?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you talked about RIP crews, Keno Springs. In the 2 years you were in Keno Springs, 2 years, right?
Yes, ma'am. I was in Nogales for 2.5 years.
Do you ever know of a RIP crew in Keno Springs during your 2 years?
No, ma'am.
Do you ever know of anyone carrying a high-powered rifle on the north side of the border in the Keno Springs area?
Yes, but may I clarify?
Yes.
There's plenty of hunting that goes on all over the southwest border. It's not abnormal for us to encounter subjects, and when I say subjects, I mean it could be a U.S. citizen, it could be an alien. We do encounter weapons. Most of the time, the hunters you can tell who they are because they like to wear orange and camouflage versus a lot of the migrants just wear camouflage. Not so much orange and red.
The RIP crews that you do encounter, fair to say those are on the west side of I-19, generally?
If I'm talking about specifically the one that I dealt with, that was west of I-19. I couldn't tell you for sure that there's no RIP crews at all in the Keno Springs area. I really couldn't speculate that.
But you don't know of any?
No, ma'am.
And in your time down here, there haven't been any sort of armed encounters between RIP crews or between organizations in the Keno Springs area, correct?
That's correct.
Now, can you tell us, is there an area, we know where the Keno Springs area is there an area called Washington Camp?
Yes, ma'am.
And where is that in relation to Keno Springs?
Be towards the southeast.
And would that area be an area where migrants load up?
Yes, it's possible to load up there as well because the roads connect.
Okay. And we had some testimony earlier in this case that 98 to 99% of the arrests in the Keno Springs area are migrants. Does that sound about accurate to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you agree that if a RIP crew was being shot at, they wouldn't be shy about shooting back?
I would imagine. I haven't been in a gunfight with the RIP crews, but I would imagine that they carried the weapons for a reason.
So if someone's shooting at them and they're armed, would you imagine they're not going to shoot back?
Probably not. I think that they would.
Other than on hunters, are you aware of an AK-47 in the Keno Springs area on a non-hunter that you were able to identify in the 2 years you were there?
No, ma'am.
Now, I want to go back to the calls that you made to the Sheriff's Department. And I think maybe you misspoke earlier when you said something about Pima County Sheriff's Department. All of your interactions were with the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Department, correct?
I apologize, ma'am. Did I say Pima County?
Only one time, I think maybe you just misspoke. I just want to clear that up. Pima
Yes, it was
County Sheriff's Department was not
only
involved.
Santa Cruz County.
Okay, and that's probably because you're in Tucson now, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And so you said you had some initial calls, that the initial call came from Agent Morcell to Agent Hersey, is that right?
Yes.
And that initial call you got, the call was from Mr. Kelly, I'm being shot at and I'm shooting back, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's what you conveyed to the Sheriff's Department?
Yes. However, may I clarify?
Sure.
Initially, yes, that was the information that was passed.
And we'll go to the second call in a minute, so I'll get to that in
Understood.
just a sec. So the first call is, I'm being shot at and I'm shooting back.
Yes, ma'am.
And so then there's a second call, and on the second call, that's when Agent Morcell tells you, now he's on a second call with the rancher, and the rancher's now saying he's not sure if he's being shot at.
That's correct, ma'am.
Did Agent Morcell pass on the information to you that, that Mr. Kelly told him they were too far away for him to tell if they had weapons or not?
No, ma'am.
At some point, did you get some information from Agents Dugan and Heredia that you passed on to the Sheriff's Department?
Agents Dugan and Heredia were physically on scene with the deputies. I learned that when they initially arrived, Mr. Kelly wasn't present there. They met with Mr. Kelly's wife.
And did you pass on the information they gave you from Mrs. Kelly's wife to the Sheriff's Department?
I don't recall that. Yes, actually, now that I think about it, yes.
And Your Honor, perhaps if I could refresh the agent's recollection with Exhibit JJJ. Do we have that? Thank you. So Agent Lagulian, I've shown you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit JJJ, correct? And if I've turned you to page 56, I believe. Is that right on the bottom? Does it say 56?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you look at the time 15:05 and see if that refreshes your recollection regarding a call with the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell us, did that refresh your memory?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Can you tell us what you communicated to the Sheriff's Department about what Agents Heredia and Dugan informed you of?
Yes, Agents Dugan and Heredia informed me that they weren't able to immediately locate Mr. Kelly, but they did speak with his spouse, and that they were told that he was going to chase the group of 5 or so that were armed off of his property.
So you're the one who communicated that to the Sheriff's Department, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And while we're on that subject, is Agent Dugan with the Border Patrol anymore?
No, ma'am.
And he's left the Border Patrol, is that right?
He has a different career now,
Okay.
different agency.
He left to go to a different agency.
Yes.
You talked a little bit about the cameras. Can we talk about the cameras just for a minute? You said the cameras don't change location, but can the camera views change? In other words, can what you're looking at with the camera change?
Yes, so the camera itself is fixed. It can do 360 degrees, and then it can, so it can look in every direction, and then it can look up and down. It can't go all the way. I couldn't tell you exactly how far up or down it could look, but for example, it'll miss things that are directly beneath it sometimes, and there's really not a point in looking directly up at the sun with the camera.
But just so we're clear, they can move around?
Yes.
And are they operated by the camera operator, in this case, Agent Hersey?
Yes, it could be operated by Agent Hersey or whoever was assigned that camera that day. The agents in the communication center generally will split up which cameras they want to work.
Okay. And I wanted to follow up with you a little bit about the calls. You talked about this game of telephone that y'all were playing with Kelly calling Morcell, Morcell calling Tercey, Tercey giving you information. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Could all of that have been solved if Mr. Kelly had directly called 911?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
You said that when, on the second call, you received the information from Agent Morcell that you relayed, that he told you the defendant said he struck something. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that how Agent Morcell relayed it to you?
Yes. May I clarify?
Yes.
There was a considerable amount of confusion going on as far as what was actually happening on the ground there. As we've talked about the telephone game that was going on, so we didn't know exactly why there was a follow-up call from Mr. Kelly, and Mr. Kelly was specific about wanting a response from us.
I wanted to ask you about that as well. Did Agent Morcell relay to you that he talked to Mr. Kelly about including the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, Agent Morcell was trying to get to the reason of the call. He asked Mr. Kelly about whether he needs like emergency response or medical response, and what was relayed to me was that that Mr. Kelly wasn't going to answer those kind of questions over the phone, but would rather talk to us in person.
Did Agent Morcell tell you that he told Mr. Kelly to call 911?
I don't recall.
Oh, one more question for you. Up in the Keno Springs area, are there pine trees near residences?
Ma'am, I don't know every single residence there, but I would imagine there might be some pine trees.
Could I have just a second, Your Honor? Am I forgetting anything? I don't have anything else, Your Honor.
Redirect examination.
Thank you, Judge. You talked about the confusion on this phone call, this game of telephone that we're talking about. Obviously, under those circumstances, something can be miscommunicated, right?
Yes.
And Ms. Hunley was asking you about something that Mrs. Kelly possibly said to the agents who responded. Do you recall her asking you that?
Yes.
And you obviously didn't speak to Mrs. Kelly, correct?
No, ma'am.
And generally, the best thing to do if there are these different layers of communication to find out what's going on and what really is said is to talk to the people who are out there, right?
Yes, ma'am. May I clarify that?
Sure.
So I did, the telephone game existed between Mr. Kelly, Agent Morcell, Agent Tercey, and I. When I dispatched the two agents there, along with Santa Cruz, I was able to talk to them directly. That's outside of the telephone game. So I was able to talk to them on the radio.
Okay, but never Mr. Kelly and never Mrs. Kelly, right?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Hunley was always also asking you about some RIP crews and whether or not you were aware of a RIP crew in the Keno Springs area. And you said that you weren't aware of one, right?
Correct.
But also that you can't speculate, right? So in other words, they could be there, you just don't know about them.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Similar to how the vehicles who go through those Normandy barriers are there, even if you haven't apprehended them.
That's slightly different, and if I may, the existence of a RIP crew, in general, RIP crews don't want, they don't want to be known, right? They exist to rob the other competing smuggling organizations. To me, that's different from a vehicle incursion into the United States, because that's not so hidden in that they might do a really good job cutting the fence and repairing it, but there's still going to be a scar on the fence, if you will. You'll still see it.
Right. And RIP crews, they're robbing drug smugglers, right?
It depends. Some of them...
Or migrants.
Or migrants. And they either take the migrants into, basically, they're kidnapped.
So in other words, if I'm a drug smuggler and then I get attacked by a RIP crew and they steal my drugs, I'm probably not going to call you, right?
If you were smuggling drugs and somebody and a RIP crew took your load,
I would not be calling law enforcement,
generally,
right?
no. I've never received that phone call.
Okay. And then same thing for migrants. They're here illegally. They're pretty vulnerable. If a RIP crew were to attack them, rob them, kidnap them, they're probably not going to be able to report that, right?
Ma'am, I disagree. We receive quite a few 911 calls from migrants all over the AOR. Some of them do report that, they were robbed. They can't give us a very good description necessarily, or they're intentionally not giving us a good description. But people get robbed all the time. There's all kinds of altercations that happen unbeknownst to us until we get those calls.
So migrants do report to you being attacked by RIP crews and bandits and things of that nature.
They don't use those words. They do use bandits sometimes, or they'll say mafia. But it's generally not the easiest thing to pinpoint exactly where those events took place, and sometimes they'll report something to us that occurred while they were in Mexico. Sometimes they report stuff to us that happened north of the line. But specifically Keno Springs, I can't recall an exact specific report in that time frame of January 30th.
Okay. You mentioned also that sometimes you just find guns in the desert, right? Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, and when I say we, I mean the entire Border Patrol, I don't mean me specifically.
Right, and I'm talking about collective knowledge, not necessarily something you personally have encountered.
Correct.
But do guns sometimes get dropped for whatever reason in the desert?
Yes, ma'am.
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation. Foundation.
Overruled.
Yes.
Okay, and why does that happen, if you know?
If someone were to drop a weapon in the desert, it could be that they don't want to be caught with it.
And because if somebody's caught with a weapon, that's a worse offense, right? Than, say, just regular illegal reentry, right?
Illegal reentry would be that's a felony. We send people to jail for that every day, or at least set them up for prosecution. A non-citizen migrant in possession of a firearm is a worse offense.
Okay. And if you saw a group that was carrying backpacks and rifles, and they're not hunters, they're not hikers, okay, they're present in the United States illegally, a group carrying backpacks and rifles, what conclusions would you come to about that group?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Sustained if you establish more foundation. You can ask additional questions.
You've seen or you've apprehended drug traffickers, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And have they ever been carrying large backpacks?
Yes, ma'am.
And have they ever been carrying rifles?
With cases that I've been involved with, there have been rifles and pistols.
Okay. And so if you were to see a group of migrants or people who are in the United States illegally carrying large backpacks and carrying rifles, that's likely a group who's engaged in drug smuggling, right?
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
Sustained.
If you see that group that I just described, what are they likely to be doing?
Probably smuggling something. Or defending themselves from a rip crew, which means they're smuggling something.
Thank you. We were asking something about this game of telephone that we were talking about, and I believe you stated that what was relayed to you was that Mr. Kelly said, I may have struck something, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever learn later that that's not actually what he said?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so you never learned that what he actually said was something may have been struck.
This is the first time I've heard that.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness from members of the jury? We'll go to the bench conference. Question from one of the jurors. Agent Layugan, was there a point in time when you noticed that there was a change in the trend? When people were crossing and carrying backpacks, was there a change in the trend in what they were carrying in the backpacks? What the contents of the backpacks were?
No, but if I might clarify, generally the contents of a backpack will include food, clothes, a blanket, and from time to time, hard narcotics. When that happened would probably not, so not everybody that carries a backpack is carrying narcotics. But when the harder narcotics, when we started to see that more frequently was probably about, 3 years ago or so.
All right, that's because the harder narcotics are smaller volume of.
Yes.
Right. Does that answer your question, sir? All right, thank you. Any follow-up questions to this question to the witness from the state?
No, Judge, thank you.
From the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Very well. Any other questions for this witness? Seeing none, you can step down. The state can call its next witness. Defense, I'm
Defense,
sorry.
Judge.
Defense can also.
We call Agent Gorman.
Thank you. All right, I'll give this. Yeah.
Judge, did you want to take a mid-afternoon break?
Yeah, sorry, I lost track of time again. I apologize. All right, it's about, intercept Agent Duggan. We'll take a 30-minute recess, and we'll be back in court at 3:25. We're adjourned and recess until 3:25.
We rise before
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of all jurors, counsel, and the defense can call its next witness.
Defense calls Agent Kenneth Gorman.
Good afternoon, sir. If you could step forward to the clerk here, she will swear you in. You bet.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the matter before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. If you'd come over here, it's the witness stand. Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Could you tell us your name and spell your last name for the record, please?
Yes, for the record, my name is Kenneth Gorman, and it's Gorman.
And could you pull yourself a little bit closer to the
that work?
microphone? Yes, that works for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're currently retired, right?
That is correct.
What did you do before you retired?
I was a supervisory Border Patrol agent at the Nogales Station for about 17 years. I've been an agent for total career time of 27 years.
And can you briefly just walk us through your training and experience?
Okay, my training would start at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and at that time it was in Glencoe, Georgia. It was a 19-week program, which I passed. Then there's a 6-month or so field training unit program at the Nogales Station, and then you are an agent. As an agent, you continuously have training throughout your career, different types of training each year, say for firearms, updates in law, updates in court decisions.
And how long were you stationed at the Nogales Station?
I've only been at the Nogales Station. I did have a detail for 2 months out of the station, but the remainder of the 27 years was at the Nogales Station.
And I want to talk to you about the events of January 30th of 2023. Do you recall that date?
Yes.
And do you recall becoming involved in the case of George Allen Kelly?
To be honest, I had a very minimal role in that case. I was just the supervisor of Agent Morcell. He's the one who's ranch liaison. He called me in the afternoon to tell me that this was going on. At that time, I told him to report it to the command center where they dispatched agents and I imagine the sheriffs.
Was that about the extent of your involvement in this particular case?
Yes, and one other thing though, so Agent Marcel obviously had to write a report, and I'm the one that reviewed the report to check for grammatical errors, spelling mistakes, and just make sure like the date was right, stuff of that nature.
Are you familiar with the Keno Springs area?
Yes.
And the call in this case deals with the Keno Springs area, right?
Yes.
Are you familiar with Mr. Kelly's property?
Vaguely familiar with it. I have been on that area as an agent and as a supervisor, but to actually around the dwelling in that area, in my career, I've never actually seen that dwelling.
You've never seen the actual ranch house, is that what
Correct.
you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the Keno Springs area. What's that area like?
Okay, the
Under objection, cumulative.
It's the defense case, so overrule.
Go ahead.
The Keno Springs area is directly next to the United States border with Mexico. It's a fairly remote area, and there's a small community of homes in that area as well. And there is obviously a lot of activity in that area. As a matter of fact, if you were to even drive on the Duquesne Road, it even says beware of illegal activity. There's actually signs there.
Tell us about the illegal activity that you're familiar with that goes on in the Keno Springs area.
Okay, in the Keno Springs area, there is or has been drug smuggling and trafficking of people in that area.
And tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about Duquesne Road. What role does Duquesne Road play in that activity?
Okay, Duquesne Road is an unpaved road, but it's a popular road to go to points east to Washington Camp area, and it's the first main road where groups or traffic will cross as they enter the United States.
And so are we talking about, foot traffic that comes through this area?
Predominantly it can be foot traffic. In years past, before the fence was there, we would actually even have drive-throughs. To this day, it is still possible drive-throughs could go through the area that's still not built.
When you say drive-throughs, you're talking about vehicles?
Correct.
What types of groups are coming through this area?
It could be any people from all different nationalities, predominantly Mexico and Central America, but we have had nationalities from all over. And then, of course, there has been some marijuana smuggling when that was popular. Now, to this day, there's a little bit of marijuana smuggling, but mostly it would be methamphetamines and harder narcotics.
Where do you typically see these harder narcotics? For example, how are they carried through the Keno Springs area?
They would be usually
Objection,
there.
Your Honor, leading.
How would they be carried through the Keno Springs
It
area?
assumes that they're carried through the Keno Springs area. It's leading.
Overruled.
Okay. They'll do it, they'll carry it using backpacks filled with narcotics, if that's what they have.
And you said that marijuana was bigger in the past, and that
Yes.
has shifted, right?
Correct.
Describe marijuana backpacks versus backpacks, or however
Okay.
harder narcotics are being carried.
So the marijuana backpacks was an actual physical, a burlap sack filled with marijuana, usually on average, in my experience, weighing 40 to 50 pounds. Sometimes they were heavier, sometimes a little less. The harder narcotics would be in a school book bag style of backpack, and they would be in a Tupperware container, but the same type of people can also have clothes and other effects in there as well.
And those backpacks, let me back up. Do migrants also typically carry backpacks?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
And what do these backpacks typically look like?
They're almost always going to be black, and again, like a school book bag would be a good description of what the backpacks look like.
You said almost always black. I didn't quite hear you.
Yeah, they're almost always black.
What about camouflage? Do you see camouflage backpacks?
Sometimes, yes, as well.
Is there any significance to camouflage versus black?
No, in my opinion, no.
Okay. What about fanny packs? Do you see people carrying fanny packs as well?
In my experience, it's rare. That would be very rare.
Is there any significance to a person carrying a fanny pack versus a backpack?
Again, in my experience, I wouldn't. I mean, it's possible, but it wouldn't be eye-opening or anything of that nature.
Is there anything significant about carrying more than one, either backpack or fanny pack or some combination of the two?
No, in my experience, that sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't.
So sometimes people will just carry one bag and sometimes they'll carry more than one?
That is correct.
Okay. Tell us about RIP crews. What are those?
So what a RIP crew is they're people that work for the cartels, generally, who are trying to either steal marijuana from another group who's smuggling, or to take the migrants and take the migrants actually and then redirect them to another smuggling organization. Usually the RIP crews will either be very close to the border so that they can go back, or they're going to be points much further north because they're afraid of retribution from the cartels.
When you say very close to the border, how close do you mean?
So maybe not, a RIP crew would be, and this would be unusual presently, this was when things were more unorganized, they were more like robbing people. So they would be close to the border, so when we showed up, they would then jump back to the Mexican side where we would be unable to apprehend. The modern day RIP crew that I guess what we're talking about now were like what I first described. They work for another cartel trying to rob the other group, but they're generally further points north of the border. So like I don't know how, everyone is from this county. There was a large RIP crew, for example, in Tumacacri at one time.
And what do RIP crews do specifically? You said they rob drugs and they rob migrants. How do they accomplish that?
They're usually armed, and they will do it at gunpoint.
And so at gunpoint, they'll confront drug smugglers,
Yes, ma'am.
and they might take the drugs, right?
Yes.
Are drug smugglers likely to report that sort of attack?
No, they would not.
When a RIP crew targets a migrant group, what does that look like?
Usually sometimes they'll take the group themselves to redistribute, to resmuggle them, and usually there's a little bit of confusion with the migrants, or sometimes they just rob the migrants of their belongings and money.
So they either rob or kidnap the migrants,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
When you say they take them for themselves, how does that benefit the RIP crew to kidnap migrants?
So all the migrants have to pay to be smuggled. Everyone that wants to enter the United States at this time has to pay. So what happens is then the migrants will then report to their families, hey, this group now has me and we need to pay X amount of more dollars.
So they'll hold them for ransom,
Correct.
basically?
Yes.
Okay. What types of weapons, if you know, do RIP crews generally possess?
It could be all types of weapons, anything from pistols to rifles.
What kinds of rifles have you seen in your experience?
Usually they're, like you wouldn't see, say, an AR-15 would not be the case, but you could see what they call like an SKS or AK-47 style rifles, usually less expensive weapons.
And then how do the traffickers who are bringing drugs or bringing people, how do they respond to the threat posed by RIP crews?
They usually run away.
Do they ever arm themselves?
It's rare, but I can't say that it's not a never, in my experience.
People who are smuggling people, the people can obviously
Yes.
run away from the RIP crews, right?
Mm-hmm.
What about, so people carrying drugs, if a RIP crew steals the drugs, they've lost value, correct?
Yes.
So is there any difference in how folks who carry drugs respond to RIP crews versus folks who are smuggling people?
I really couldn't answer that because the people that are generally moving the drugs or people, they're just a part in the organization, so their job, it's not like they're losing their own, they're just working for somebody else.
What other precautions do these organizations take to avoid, besides RIP crews, but also encounters with Border Patrol? How do they avoid detection, in other words?
In my experience, they have people here in the United States, usually in high points, in high places, with a cell phone, a radio, binoculars, and they will report to the people on the south side what they see, what they're observing, and they could be up there for weeks at a time.
So, and you described essentially what is a scout, right?
Yes.
And what's the significance of a radio? You already described it for a scout. What's the significance of a radio for somebody who's traveling with a group not on one of those high points?
So the person within the group that has the radio, they would be then listening to the radio to respond to Border Patrol and other things, whether to hide, wait, and then move along and be guided through the directions of the people on the high point. They also use cell phones as well.
So the person with the group who has the radio is listening to this communication and they're responding in order to take in the intelligence and avoid detection.
Yes.
Does that person carrying the radio, is that typically the smuggler or just a migrant member of the group? Is there any significance to that?
It would definitely be someone involved in the smuggling of the group.
So if you see a radio on a person who's walking with a group, that person's more than likely the smuggler.
Yes.
And you talked a little bit about binoculars in terms of the scout who's up on the high point. What, if any, significance is there with binoculars being carried by somebody who's lower on the ground?
In my opinion, that person could either be giving.
Objection, relevance, Your Honor? We don't have any indication that there's anyone with binoculars lower on the ground.
And Judge, we don't know if he had them with him or not, but we know that the victim in this case was seen on a high point with binoculars and a radio and the same clothing that he was wearing when he was later discovered deceased. It's reasonable to assume that he could have had.
Overruled. Overruled. He can answer the question.
Would you mind just repeating the
Sure.
question? Just to make sure I get
So
it?
the question was, somebody who's not on a high point, somebody who's down lower with a group, possibly smuggling the group with the radio, what, if any, significance is there to that person carrying binoculars?
The significance would be like that, again, they're working for the organization, and that the binoculars were either they were going to use, or maybe they were going to the scout to give them another pair, or or replacing whoever's up there.
Do you know, you said already that everybody who crosses has to pay,
Correct.
right? Do you know if the people who are smuggling these folks, are they carrying cash, if you know?
Generally, most people would not be carrying. In my experience, you don't see a large amount of cash, because sometimes when we catch them and we determine, like let's say if they had a radio or stuff like that, that money could get seized by the government. We've had instances where our teams will seize that money, so they generally do not carry that much money.
Do you know how that payment is made? And if you don't know, you don't know. But if I'm going to pay a smuggler to smuggle me into the United States, how does that payment get made?
I would have to on that one. I think it's.
If you don't know, you don't know.
I'd rather not answer that.
I don't have anything else, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Just a couple of questions, Agent Gorman, or retired Agent Gorman,
Thank
I
you.
guess. Congratulations.
Thank
The first thing I want to ask you is, you were talking about the radios, first of all. Let's talk about that first. Are you aware of situations where migrants paid their smuggling fee by being the one who carries the radio?
It'd be unlikely, but it is possible that sometimes they would do that. But it's not. When we've interviewed people, I sometimes wonder if that's just what they're saying to try and get the onus off of them.
But people say that, right?
They do.
Oh, so you hear that.
I have heard more driving vehicles than carrying a radio.
But some people carrying radios, you have learned that's what they tell you happens.
Honestly, not with the radio.
Not with the radio?
No.
So guides aren't frequently people who are paying their fee by helping cross people?
No. Because they would need to know the way.
Well, maybe they know the way,
Oh, okay.
but that's why they're the one who gets to come across for free by carrying the radio,
Okay.
right?
It's not totally unlikely, but at the same time, most of the time it's people that they're usually minors, and they'll usually do it repeated times and know the area really well. Someone that maybe just did it a few times wouldn't be familiar enough with the area, and they'd be very likely that then they would get caught, which is not what they want to do.
Now, we've heard from a number of other officers that in the Keno Springs area, it's 98 to 99% migrants arrests in that area. Is that correct?
I don't really want to give a percentage because I could be off, but we do, as Border Patrol, encounter more migrants than we do drugs, if that's kind of what your question's implying. But
That-
yeah, by far more we catch migrants.
Now, you talked about the difference between a time when it was organized versus a time that it's not organized when you were talking to about RIP crews. I had no idea what you meant.
Okay.
What are you talking about?
To clarify that, I apologize if it was unclear. Years past, the smuggling organizations were very small and loose-knit. So it would just be like a gang in the area. This was in the 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Through time, the cartel started to take over these groups, and they became more and more structured and more organized to the point now where one cartel can control what they call a plaza, like the Keno Springs area, and that's predominantly the one dominant group in that area.
And do these organizations have a financial incentive not to have issues in their area with law enforcement?
Yes.
And you'd agree with me that the organizations in the Keno Springs area are very low-key organizations that don't try to make trouble?
That is correct.
And you'd agree with me that you haven't seen a rip crew in the Keno Springs area in 15 years, is that right?
Yes, I would have to say it's been
Or
a
even
while since.
or even longer?
I'm trying to recall the last time that something like that happened. It's been a while, especially the Keno Springs. Now, a little further to the west, or east, excuse me, in the mountains, things change a little, but the Keno Springs area is a different area because it's flatter.
And nothing as far as rip crews go in that area, is that right?
Not that I am aware of.
You talked about AK-47s. Do you see those in the Keno Springs area, other than on hunters?
No.
Do you even know when the last time is you saw an AK-47 in the Keno Springs area?
Generally, if they're seen, they're going to be on the Mexican side, not the U.S. side.
What's the likelihood of seeing 5 guys with AK-47s in the Keno Springs area?
Objection, foundation.
Sustained. You can ask additional questions to try and establish foundation.
All right. Are you familiar with what the groups look like that are coming through the Keno Springs area?
Yes, yes.
I mean, you just testified to all of this stuff.
Yes, yeah, I am familiar, yes.
And you've been there 27 years?
Yes,
And so you'd be familiar with whether you see a group of 5 guys with AK-47s walking around or not, right?
yes.
Have you ever seen a group of 5 guys with AK-47s walking around in the Keno Springs area?
I have not.
Would that be something that you would find to be unlikely in that area?
Yes. Generally, may I add just one thing, or?
Sure.
Most of the time, if it's a group of people, maybe one person, in my experience, would have a rifle. Not all of them. It'd usually be one, and then the rest, because they're heavy, would be carrying, let's say, drugs. That would be the circumstances where you'd have some.
But again, you haven't seen anyone in the Keno Springs area with an AK-47
Objection,
in years.
asked and answered.
Sustained.
If you do see a rip crew, and a rip crew gets shot at, what's your experience of whether a rip crew is going to shoot back?
Objection, it's vague as to who's shooting. It's vague hypothetical.
If you can answer. Overruled.
Okay. Usually the RIP crews will not engage with Border Patrol, but that doesn't mean that they don't engage with others. I have, in my experience, had groups say, we've been shot at with men with rifles. Could that have been in Mexico or the U.S.? That is yet to be determined, because sometimes the groups don't know where they're at totally. I mean, they keep going through fences, and especially, barbed wire fence, they don't know.
Well, let me stop you a second. You were saying a minute ago at the defense that you see rip crews with all these kind of rifles and weapons. Is that right?
I've not personally seen RIP crews with rifles. It's more reading reports, or the time we have, like I said, generally when we see the RIP crews with the rifles would be on the south side. I don't know if I can bring up a certain instance that happened about 15 years ago in Tumacacori, so I got to be careful what I say and don't say right now.
So Tumacacori, that's an area
Right.
where you remember a rip crew 15 years ago.
Yes.
And that's not near Keno Springs, correct?
No, it is not.
Okay. And the other incidents that you're familiar with, most rip crew incidents happen west of I-19. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
So this is not an area where you generally see rip crews, right?
This was many years ago. 2 agents were shot by the border pretty close to that Keno Springs area.
And that
It was
was
around 2005, though.
And that was along the border with the Sonoyta area, right?
No, it would be still considered the Keno Springs area, but to the east of it,
It's in the mountains, though, right?
right at the foothills.
And that was 15 years ago.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all I had, Your Honor. Thank you.
Redirect?
Thank you, Judge. You mentioned rip crews generally being more prolific on the west side of the freeway. Are there trends involved with this sort of activity?
Yeah, I mean, everything's sort of trendy, and some of it is just what we know. I mean, there's a lot of unknown out there as well.
Say a little bit more about that. How do you know what you don't know?
So the way the Border Patrol gathers intelligence can be through, obviously, human intelligence, human sources, people that we catch say we were shot at. Or we have, it's common knowledge that we have cameras that are trail cameras, hunting cameras. It was on the border war, so I'm not saying anything classified. And then there's also, we have what we call integrated fixed towers and another form of tower, and these towers can see for several miles, day and night.
And so my question was, how do you know what you don't know? You said there were a lot of unknowns. What about what you just said tells you that there's a lot we don't know?
Well, sometimes we catch people, and during an interview, they'll say that they got away with certain things, and it's obviously stuff that got through us, so that would be what I'm surmising as the unknown, because they got through us, and then they're telling us about it.
Okay, so just because you don't see a rip crew in a certain area doesn't mean one isn't active there, right?
Correct.
Okay. And speaking of trends, do you notice, I suppose, shifting in the types of activity and the locations where that activity happens over time?
Sometimes areas do heat up more than other areas, but I couldn't surmise why.
Were you aware, or what was the Keno Springs area like on January 30th of 2023? Was activity picking up at that time? Was it settling down? Tell us about that.
You know, at that point, I was in public affairs with the ranch liaison, so it wouldn't be fair for me to give a good answer to that, because I wasn't actively in an enforcement mode at that point.
But the ranch liaison would know about that area at the time?
He may know more just because his relationships with the ranchers.
Okay.
And it's not just ranchers, it's really his job, even when we call it ranch liaison, it's anyone that lives by the border. So not whether they're a rancher or not, if they just have land and property. They
Right.
just be part of it.
But he's responsible for knowing what's going on in that area at that time.
To a degree, because he's engaging with the people of the area, they hopefully will let him know.
Okay. I think you mentioned, maybe I didn't hear you correctly, an incident where, did you say 2 aliens were shot?
No, that 2 Border Patrol agents.
2 Border Patrol agents were shot. Okay. And that happened in a different area some years back, right?
Just to the east, about a mile or 2 miles east of the ranch, and their names were Juan Villa and Christopher Brinkoff.
Okay. So there's violence out there at least periodically then?
Yes.
Okay, so even if it's not part of or even if it's not a common thing, it obviously, unfortunately, can happen, right?
Yes.
You said something about the foot guides usually being minors. Did I hear you correctly on that one?
Objection. That was not the witness did not testify to that, and it's beyond the scope.
Well, actually, that's what I heard him say.
That's what I heard him say too.
If I'm wrong, I stand corrected, but I thought that's
I
what you-
did say it.
Okay.
In my experience, most of your foot guides are minors because we have a different process on how we treat minors, or the agency, not we, I'm retired, than we do adults. So to prosecute a minor is a very difficult thing, so the minors usually get returned back to Mexico within 24 hours.
So that's why they would be recruited for that position in the
That is correct.
organization. What would it tell you if you saw somebody who's in his 40s, let's say, who's a smuggler of some kind?
Again, Your Honor, that's beyond the scope.
It deals with the same question of the significance of a minor versus an adult.
I didn't ask him that on cross, Your Honor.
All right, overruled, he can answer.
It's possible an adult, but that would be under what I've seen in my experience, it would be unlikely.
So what would the more likely explanation be?
Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Yeah.
Well,
And, Your Honor, the state was asking about likelihood of rip crews and probabilities and whether certain things are likely or not. So I'm just asking what the likelihood is that there's an adult who's...
all right, overruled, if you have a basis to give an opinion, you can do so.
All right. I mean, there's always going to be exceptions to every rule or anomalies. I'm just kind of go by the general of what I've seen. I hope that answers it for you all.
So what is the most likely explanation then? For an adult, not a juvenile, an adult who's smuggling. What is the adult likely to be smuggling?
It'd be very speculative. I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, people want to make a living, and maybe they're very experienced at it.
Your Honor, and I'm going to object.
I
The
think
witness
it-
has said it's speculative.
Sustained.
Fair enough. I don't have anything else, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any questions for this witness from any members of the jury? All right, seeing none, thank you, sir. You can step down. Defense can call its next witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Sheriff Hathaway.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the matter before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Thank you, sir. If you could come over here to the witness stand, please, and have a seat.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So you tell us your name and spell your last name for the record, please.
David Hathaway, Hathaway.
And what is your position?
I'm the elected sheriff for Santa Cruz County, Arizona.
Prior to being sheriff, you have some law enforcement background, is that right?
That's correct.
Can you describe that background for us?
I worked with the Drug Enforcement Administration. I did 8 different assignments for the Drug Enforcement Administration. The last 3 of those were supervisory assignments where I was the head of the office. My last assignment was the head of the DEA office here in Santa Cruz County, Arizona.
And what sorts of assignments or what sorts of experience did you have with the DEA?
A lot of different experiences. 15 years of my career involved investigations in Latin America, 8 years was actually living in Latin America, and 7 years was working along the border, doing cases on both sides of the border. I did undercover work in all major categories of drugs: methamphetamine, cocaine, marijuana, heroin, and was involved in multiple investigations.
And so obviously safe to say most of your investigations are involving drugs, right?
That's correct.
And drug trafficking, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Under whose authority did you operate when you were in Latin America doing these investigations?
I carried a diplomatic passport, and when I was actually living in South America for 8 years, and when I operated in Mexico on this side of the border, I would go into Mexico, and depending on the nature of the operation, if we were going to do some kinetic enforcement action like arrest somebody or search somebody or seize evidence, it would be under the authority of the Mexican government, where we would be in an auxiliary role.
Okay. Did you receive any training with the DEA involving interviewing people?
Yes, ma'am.
Describe that training.
To try to get to the truth, we're trained to try to get to the truth, to observe body language, to ask basic questions about, who, what, where, when, how, and to try to assess the truth, whatever it is.
Did you have any experience working with the DEA in dealing with informants?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us a little bit about working with informants.
A lot of times, informants would be usually a protected individual, an individual whose identity we would not disclose generally. And when I worked in the foreign environment, we didn't disclose them to the foreign government because in our experience, we would lose witnesses. In my personal experience, 3 times in foreign countries, witnesses in my case were killed after we notified the foreign government. So a lot of times we would protect them and not advise the foreign government about their existence.
And so an informant, just to kind of summarize that, an informant is somebody who is operating in the criminal world, right? And then they're providing information to you as a law enforcement person about the criminal goings-on that they know about, right?
At times that could be true. At times they could be a night clerk at a hotel that's informing us on people that are paying with cash or doing unusual activities. At times they are familiar with the criminal world. But while they're operating under the auspices of the DEA, we wouldn't authorize them to commit criminal activity. Sometimes we would do controlled undercover operations where we were surveilling their activity and approving of certain aspects of their activity.
Did you ever in this experience encounter somebody who's claiming to be an informant, but who's possibly deliberately providing you with false information?
I did at times work with informants that were doing illegal activity that I wasn't aware of. Let me think about your question a little bit.
I guess it's in the sense of, let's say you're a drug trafficking organization, and you know that there's law enforcement out there. And law enforcement might be trying to get informants from within my drug trafficking organization, let's say. Have you ever encountered a situation where somebody who's in the drug trafficking organization creates people who basically pretend to be informants to feed law enforcement with false information?
In my case, I don't recall that happening to me, but I can imagine where that does happen on occasions.
That's certainly a concern that law enforcement would have when dealing with any informant that comes forward, right?
That's correct, to assess their veracity and assure that they're being above board with us.
And how do you assess a person's veracity?
It would depend on the circumstances, mannerisms, body language, the evasiveness. There may be other things that aren't coming to me right now.
Can you provide just some more concrete examples of that?
Of assessing if somebody's above board, like,
Yes. How do you do that practically?
well, in individual cases are all different. Like the nature of an informant or a witness or a protected witness could involve a lot of different activities. They may work in a bank. They may be, transporting drugs. They may be a pilot. I've had informants that were pilots. And it would involve different things, like if it was a pilot, looking at their pilot logs and see if they had taken the trips they said they had. It's such a wide range of possibilities. It would be looking at evidence to support what they're saying and to see if they're deviating in what they're telling us.
And so it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you would look to see if what they're telling you is corroborated in some way.
That's correct.
And that could be with documentation of their activities, like a pilot log that you mentioned. That's one example, right?
Right, and it could be physical evidence and things like that.
What about statements of other informants?
Yes, that could be used to corroborate.
Obviously, if two people tell you two different things, then you might have to question the veracity of one or both of those people.
That's correct, and then come down on the side that has the actual evidence that would support that side.
Tell us about your involvement in this case. How did that get started?
On February 14th of 2023, I went to Mexico to extend my condolences to the family members of Gabriel Quen Buitimea, who had been killed in the Kino Springs area. I sought out the family members, which was his daughter, Jessica Quen, his daughter Daniela Quen, and their uncle Juan Carlos Rodriguez. They were very sad. The daughters were crying, and we had a discussion about how to deal with sorrow and grief and put their faith in God. And also, during that conversation, Juan Carlos Rodriguez told me he was aware of an eyewitness to the shooting of Gabriel.
Let me just back up a little bit. January 30th, 2023, did you have any involvement in this case on that date?
No, other than being briefed as the sheriff, I did not.
Are you briefed as the sheriff on every case or not every case?
The major cases I do receive every day, the dispatch logs, which describe the activity and what the deputy's response was to the incoming call activity. So I do get written versions, but in-person briefings only on things of more significance that are more major.
And this was one of those cases, right?
That's correct.
So you receive a brief on January 30th. What form did that brief take? Who briefed you?
I don't know the exact date of the first briefing, but it was an ongoing set of briefings. Usually our detectives, which are in our branch we call CID, the Criminal Investigation Division. So those people would brief me usually as a group, which is Sergeant Flores, the head of CID, Mario Barba, Detective Ainza, Joe Bunting, the people at that time who were involved in the investigation, also the patrol deputies. But it would usually be from the members of the CID, the actual detectives and their supervisor, that would let me know what the latest was.
And you don't know who that was in this case, or it could have been some combination over a period of time of all of those people?
It was usually a group. They would usually come in and brief me as a group.
Okay. And even in major cases where you get briefings, you don't participate in investigations in major cases, or is that something you always do?
I can do it, and I usually don't do that.
Why did you do it in this case?
In this case, I went down and talked to the family members. They mentioned the witness, and I had significant experience interviewing people in foreign countries. I speak Spanish, and there was somewhat of hesitancy amongst county employees in the county attorney's office and in the sheriff's office to go to Mexico. And so the day after February 14th, 2023, I went with Detective Barba to actually interview the witness. Up to this point, I didn't know if there was really a witness. I didn't have a name, but at that date, I went to Mexico.
And I am going to get there. I just want to go back. So my question was, or I think what you said is you usually don't get involved personally in investigations, even in major cases, right?
That's correct.
What is the reason for usually not getting involved in cases?
Well, even though I am peace officer certified as the elected sheriff, I have people that I delegate to do those things. That's what the word deputy sheriff, it means they're deputy acting on my behalf. And I have layers of supervision between me and the people that are actually doing the patrol or the detective work. But in this case, with the hesitancy to go to Mexico, and I've been going to Mexico my whole life. I grew up in Nogales, and I've worked in Latin American environments for many years. It was unnatural for me to go do that, to go have a talk, like to go interview somebody.
And so what you're saying is you got involved because you were going to go into Mexico. That's essentially why you got involved in this case. Is that what you're saying? I'm trying to understand.
Well, yeah, initially I got involved because I wanted to extend my condolences to the family members. And during that meeting, I was told that there is an eyewitness. So I asked the individual that told me that there was an eyewitness, I wasn't given a name, if they could arrange a meeting with that individual. So I was already involved at that point. And
I'm going to get to that meeting also. You said other deputies and the county attorneys were hesitant to go to Mexico. Is that what you said? I'm just trying to understand your testimony.
yeah, that was my impression.
Why is it your impression that these folks were hesitant to go to Mexico?
Possibly because of their career and not sure what they could do or couldn't do, or didn't want to get in trouble. Whereas I had the federal experience, I had done this for many years, and I knew it was no big deal to just go talk to somebody in Mexico, just interview somebody.
Did anybody, I'm still trying to understand this hesitancy. Did anybody tell you, I don't want to go to Mexico because X, Y, Z? Did anybody give you anything like that?
I asked for volunteers, and so far, to my knowledge, the county attorney has detectives, and they've never been to Mexico. I've made contacts on their behalf. I served a subpoena on the witness, and it has been me for over a year that has assured that this witness stayed available. I asked for, on the 15th, when I went back, I asked for a volunteer from the detectives, and Mario Barba volunteered. I told him, don't take a gun, don't wear a uniform. We're not going to do any enforcement action. We're just going to talk to somebody if they appear, if somebody in fact does appear.
I guess my question was, did anybody express verbally to you hesitancy about going into Mexico?
I remember discussing it, and people,
With who?
With the detectives, and the detectives not coming forth and saying, okay, I'll go do it, and then I recruited a volunteer.
When you say you discussed this with the detectives, who are we talking about?
Sergeant Al Flores, Detective Ainza, Mario Barba, possibly Pacheco, and Bunting was a detective and then became a patrol sergeant. He was possibly in the environment.
Did you have a conversation all at one time with all of these folks about going into Mexico?
Yes, I did.
Did any of them say to you, we can't do that?
No, there was hesitancy, but I was willing to do it, so I just said, well, I'll do it, and give me a volunteer to go with me.
And why did you believe you needed to go into Mexico?
This was obviously a crucial witness. If we really had an eyewitness to this shooting, I hadn't seen anything like that in my briefings in this case. If we actually had an eyewitness that is traveling with Gabrielle, that was the key to this case, and we couldn't let that fall through the cracks. I wasn't going to let that fall through the cracks. It was a matter of just going to Mexico, seeing if he shows up, and talking to him, just doing an interview with him, just like a newspaper reporter would go to Mexico and interview somebody who was a witness.
The first time this witness came to light, was that as a result of you going to meet the family members in Mexico?
Yes.
How did that meeting come about?
I talked to the detectives about what kind of contact information. They had a phone number for Jessica, Daniela, and Juan Carlos. I called those numbers, and Juan Carlos Rodriguez answered the phone, identifying himself as the uncle of the two daughters of the deceased man. And then I asked if we could meet, and we arranged a meeting with him and the two daughters.
And that was the first meeting that you had with him and the two daughters. When was that?
February 14th, 2023.
And at that meeting, the family members communicated to you, we have a witness. Is that what happened, essentially?
Yes, ma'am.
And that had not been communicated to you before?
That's correct.
Okay. You said that's a crucial witness. We hadn't seen anything like that in my briefings, right? That's what you said about this witness?
I don't know if I phrased it exactly that way. I had heard that there was a witness who didn't have papers, but that's just kind of anecdotal. I'd heard that there was a witness, but with no further information.
Had you heard about a witness by the name of Miguel?
I don't recall.
So you don't recall Miguel in your briefings. Had you heard about a witness named Ramon?
Yes, I did.
And did you hear about Ramon prior to hearing about this other witness?
Yes, prior to that.
Okay. So you were aware that there was one at least, who was claiming to be a witness, Ramon, right?
I didn't know if he was, I don't know what he saw, or I don't know anything about that one other than the name Ramon was a potential witness. I never talked to that person.
Okay. But prior to meeting with the family in Mexico, you're aware that there's a person out there named Ramon who might claim to be a witness to this offense also?
That's correct.
All right. And then February 14th, you travel into Mexico. Are you by yourself on February 14th?
Yes, ma'am.
You meet with the family members. Where did you meet?
At the Leos Cafeteria, which is on the corner of Calle Campillo and Avenida Obregón, at about 10 in the morning, and it was really noisy in there, so we decided to go across the street to the Fray Marcos de Niza Hotel, to the restaurant in the first floor.
And present there are two daughters and Juan Carlos Rodriguez, right?
That's correct.
Juan Carlos Rodriguez claims he's a family member of some kind.
He identified himself as an uncle. I don't know exactly what his relation is, but he just said he was the uncle, and the daughters said he was their uncle.
And you didn't do anything to corroborate any of that?
That's correct.
Did you document this meeting, this February 14th meeting?
Initially, I did not. And then Chief Deputy County Attorney Kim Hunley advised me in April that it would be advisable for me to document it. I didn't do any interview. I didn't seize any property. I didn't arrest anybody. I was just talking to the family members. None of them were identified as direct victims or eyewitnesses. So I didn't feel the need to document it. It didn't seem like investigative in nature. Chief Deputy Attorney Chief Deputy County Attorney Kim Hunley advised me in April that it would be a good idea to document that report. The incident the next day was documented, but I did not document that one until
Okay,
April.
and I'm going to get there, but meeting's February 14th, you don't document it in April, so a couple months later, you're told you really should document that.
That's correct.
And then you wrote a report in April
That's
about
correct.
that meeting. Okay. February 14th is the first meeting. What is decided, or what are you determined to do as a result of that meeting that you had on February 14th?
On that first meeting, there was no name given to me, just that there's a witness, an eyewitness. And I asked Juan Carlos Rodriguez, could he arrange a meeting with that witness and me, and not knowing if that would happen or if that would be feasible, but I asked if he could arrange a meeting, and he said he would.
But he didn't provide a name of the witness?
That's correct. No name at that time.
Did you ask him for the name?
I can't recall. I probably did. I don't remember being given a name, but I probably asked.
And if you asked him for a name and he didn't give you a name, that's probably something you'd want to document, right?
Well, at this point, it was just a maybe. I didn't know what it was, and it seemed like he didn't know. He was aware of the individual, but maybe didn't know his identifying.
What do you mean it's a maybe? Explain that to me a little bit more.
Well, that's why I didn't write the report, because I wasn't interviewing a witness or a victim. I wasn't seizing evidence. I wasn't arresting anybody. This was thrown out that there is an eyewitness out there. And of course, my response was that I would like to talk to that person. So I wasn't given a name, but I did make it clear that I would like to talk to that person.
You say this was thrown out, that there was an eyewitness there. What does that mean?
I was told that there was an eyewitness that was traveling with Gabriel at the time he was killed.
By who? Who told you that?
Juan Carlos Rodriguez.
Did he tell you if there were any more witnesses or just this one?
Just that one.
But he didn't provide a name?
Not at that time, no.
Okay. And so after you have this meeting in Mexico, your next step is, I'm going to arrange to meet with this witness, right?
Yeah, I asked if Juan Carlos Rodriguez could arrange a meeting, and he said yes.
And then you obtained, or you got somebody to agree to go with you to that meeting, right?
Yes, Detective Mario Barba.
Why did you ask someone to go with you that time?
To document it and to write a report if somebody showed up, and to do the full everything, the name, who, what, where, when, to actually write it up into the form of an investigative report.
How did you approach Detective Barba about that?
Like I said before, we were having a meeting with the detectives, and I said I needed a volunteer, and he said he would go.
Did he express any hesitancy about going into Mexico?
No. I just told him, don't wear your gun, don't wear a uniform.
Why would you not wear your uniform?
We're not taking any enforcement action, and you could get in trouble wearing a uniform in Mexico.
Why could you get in trouble for wearing a uniform?
It's something that the Mexican officials might be picky about.
What do you mean when you say that?
Just that they might think you shouldn't be wearing a uniform.
Why would they think you shouldn't be wearing a uniform? What do you mean?
I don't know, like if they're thinking that you're being a Mexican police officer and wearing something that looks like, the accoutrements of a uniform.
They're wearing uniforms, right?
Usually not the ones I worked with DEA. Like they would be plain clothes with the Mexican Federal Judicial Police or the Procuraduría General de la República. But there are officers that wear uniforms in Mexico.
So you tell Barba, don't wear a uniform, don't take a gun, but you are going to go conduct this criminal investigation in Mexico now.
At that point, it was just to go see if somebody shows up and to talk to them. But it did turn into an investigative act when we were there, and somebody did show up and they did express that they were an eyewitness. And at that point, it was definitely investigative in nature and something we would definitely write up.
And that was Daniel, right?
That's Daniel.
What's his name?
His birth certificate is Daniel Alberto Ramirez Varela. And when we talked to him and we put on a report, he said Daniel Alberto Ramirez Ruiz, based on some Mexican ID he had been given. But I didn't know the Varela part till later on.
When did you learn the Varela part?
sometime down the road when the investigators had seen his Honduran birth certificate.
So you meet with this person. He claims his name is Daniel Ramirez Ruiz when you speak with him.
That's correct.
Did you ask for his identification?
I can't recall if we did or not at that time.
Did you ever see identification describing him as Daniel Ramirez Ruiz?
I don't recall.
Okay. But you do recall seeing his birth certificate sometime further down the road, right?
I didn't see it. I was told about it, that it said Varela, Daniel Ramirez Varela, on his Honduras birth certificate.
And he never provided that name to you when you spoke with him, right?
That's correct. Well, later on he did, but not at that time.
Later on, he provided Varela to you himself?
It was explained to us later on, like, for example, I arranged follow-up meetings with the county attorney's office where I would arrange for him to meet them, and he did admit during those meetings Varela as a last name.
Before we get to the content of this meeting, who from the Mexican government, if anybody, did you communicate with to explain that you were going to conduct this criminal investigation in Mexico?
On that particular occasion, I didn't specifically reach out on that, but I'm in regular contact with Marco Moreno Baez, who's the Consul General for Mexico. He has an office in Nogales, Arizona, about the case in general, but on that day in particular, I didn't reach out to anybody about doing that thing.
Why not?
I was just going, like I said, like a newspaper reporter, just going to talk to somebody in Mexico, not take any enforcement action, not arrest anybody, not seize evidence, just talk. If somebody shows up, I would talk to them.
Well, you're obviously not a newspaper reporter, right?
But with the same rights and abilities as somebody like that, as a person, to just go into Mexico and listen to somebody talk.
You're taking a statement in a criminal investigation.
As it turned out, yes, as it turned out, that is what happened. I didn't know what, if anything, would happen if somebody would show up, but as it turned out, that is correct.
And you're acting in your official capacity, right?
That's correct, yes, as the sheriff.
Right. So you're not going just as a tourist or anything. You're
That's
going
correct.
in your official capacity as the county sheriff.
Both, because I'm expressing my condolences to the family, so my personal compassion, and also here's an important investigative lead. So while this guy's available, he doesn't have papers to come to the U.S., I'm going to get down what he has to say in case we never contact him again. I want to hear what he has to say while he's available.
Why did you believe you would never contact him again?
He has no papers, and it would just be...
What do you mean he has no papers?
He has no legal documents to cross into the U.S.
Into the U.S., but he's in Mexico.
He's in Mexico.
So what caused you to believe that you would lose this opportunity if you didn't take it right then and there?
Witnesses, sometimes disappear, sometimes they get killed. And he was the victim of an assault, and I thought, well, I'm going to get down what he has to say while he's here in front of me. I didn't know if anybody would appear. He appeared, and we wanted to make sure we got down. It was just the correct thing to do, to get down what he has to say.
So why did you not, if you want to get down what he has to say and you want to do it quickly, why didn't you do a phone call with him?
I didn't have a phone number for him. And later on, when we did have a phone number for him, he lives in an area where there's not service unless he travels to an area where there is service. But I had no phone number for him to do an interview.
But why didn't you work with Juan Carlos Rodriguez to try to make that happen?
That's what I did do. I worked with Juan Carlos Rodriguez to arrange a meeting with
Why
this
not a
witness.
phone call?
I would like to, like the things we were talking about before, assess veracity and truthfulness, see the person, look in his eyes, see what my assessment is of them. Are they telling me the truth? Actually hear it in person. And it just seemed to make more sense. Phone connections are spotty and erratic. Just if he could do it in person, I wanted to do it in person.
Why were you concerned with assessing his veracity?
Well, I wanted to see what this guy was. As it turned out, he was a very humble campesino. I noticed his hands were rough and calloused from doing a lot of manual labor. Obviously a poor man. And those were just some of the things that I assessed when I saw him.
Well, my question was, why did you think it was important to assess his veracity?
Just for the reasons we talked about before, I want to assess truthfulness, and because I want the truth in this, like in this trial, this forum we're in right now, I want the truth to come out. So I wanted to assess that I was getting the truth. I don't want to put forward lies to a court or to a jury, so I wanted to assess the truth in person.
And so you at least thought there could be a concern with this person?
I always think that everybody you talk to, you're assessing their veracity.
And in order to do that effectively, you have to have some background information about what happened in the case, right?
Yes, that in this case, that did help to have background information about what happened.
And Judge, I don't know what the court wants to do. I'm about to go into a kind of different topic, and it's 4:30, so.
Oh, all right, well, let's get on this, and you can explain to me what. We're going to break for the afternoon. Counsel is moving into a new area with this witness. We'll have to recall you tomorrow morning at 8:30. What I was doing right now is talking with the lawyers about their projected progress of the case. Again, there's some factors, there are always variables that can change things. But the way things are looking right now, if things progress the way we're projecting, we would anticipate the possibility that this case could be argued, final jury instructions, and submitted to you perhaps on Thursday. All right. Again, as you've witnessed, there's some variables that can affect things, but I think that's a pretty good projection right now. So if everything works out, I would say maybe Thursday we could argue the case, closing arguments, and final jury instructions, and then time permitting, sending you off to deliberate. All right? So I'm going to stay here with the lawyers, discuss some legal matters, housekeeping type things. We're going to recess for the day. Ask the witness to come back at 8:30 tomorrow morning. We'll continue with this examination. Please be in the jury room at 8:30 tomorrow morning, and of course, remember the admonition of the court. Excuse the jury, and I'll stay here with counsel.
Please rise to the court.
All right, thanks. You could have a seat. This will be brief. The record will show the absence of the jury. When a judicial assistant comes back, he has a drafted final jury instructions. It's a rough draft, and it includes lesser included offenses and things like that that might not be necessary, but it's a working draft. And given the projected progress of the case, maybe we might get to a discussion of that Wednesday afternoon. Okay, so if you'd review it tonight, take a look at it. Again, it's a very rough draft, but and it's got to get reorganized. But take a look at that, so if we get to it, we can go over that tomorrow afternoon. And then if things continue to progress, therefore, if we settle on final jury instructions tomorrow afternoon and we get to it on Thursday, we'll be ready. All right? Good. All right, thank you very much. We'll see everyone at 8:30 tomorrow morning, and we're adjourned for the evening.
Please rise.